of you that I have not met or may not have run into you at your schools, my name is Mark Moterson. I'm the Director of Authorizing here with the State Public Charter School Authority. And I just want to thank you all for joining us for today's lottery training. We have about 30 minutes of content, maybe a little bit less, that I want to go through with you all today. And then from there, we're going to open it up to Q&A for you all to ask any questions that may be top of mind. I have a couple of just asks here before we get into the goals for today. First, the feedback that we've gotten on this lottery training in the past has been really positive. So I hope that it can be just as impactful for you all. We know that it's timely to have this information in front of you now because you're getting ready to prepare recruitment for the 23-24 school year, believe it or not. So our goal is to make sure that this information can be helpful for you as you begin to think about that. A couple of asks from you all. We are recording this training today for future use, so we'll be able to send that link out to you all after we get through the live presentation. Given that we are recording it and just for efficiency's sake, we would appreciate it if you could stay muted today throughout the first 30 minutes until we get through the PowerPoint. And then again, we'll open it up to questions. If you do have a question in the interim while we're going through this material, would strongly recommend that you utilize the chat box. My colleague Danny is going to be helping man that, and he will interrupt me with any questions as we go through the slides. Otherwise, you can hold it till the end. So we appreciate your help there and staying muted and using that so we can get a clean recording. So I would like to go through our goals for today. Number one, I just want to remind you all of our requirements related to student lotteries. I want to review allowable enrollment preferences that you may or may not be aware of. I want to review the basics of a weighted lottery, what it means and how you can use it. Danny is actually going to lead a brief summary of what you should be thinking about should you want to change your lottery, either preferences, weights, or otherwise. And then, of course, again, we're going to allow about the last 30 minutes of our time today for any questions should they not be answered in the materials. So here's our agenda. I'm going to go through again those requirements. We're going to talk about preferences and what is allowable. We're going to talk about weights. We'll spend a little bit of time just reminding you of what we are looking for in those annual submissions. We'll talk again about amending those lottery policies and then open Q&A. So this slide right here is really just a review for all of you. Again, public charter schools are free and open to all students. Public charter schools may not have admission criteria to submit an application. They shall not discriminate, and I provided the statutory reference here for future use should you want to dig into those details at a later time. And they have enrollment caps. So just two other things to emphasize on this slide. Number one, again, there are no admission criteria, so schools are not permitted to have any fee requirements in order to enroll. You may not use things like interviews. You may not have GPA requirements. As long as they are a student residing in the state of Nevada and they are classified in the appropriate grade level, they are eligible to attend your school. Second, enrollment caps. We communicate about 6 months in advance of the upcoming school year, the enrollment caps for that year, so you know how many available seats and what grades you may have vacancies. But because we have enrollment caps, lotteries are really used to ensure a fair and equitable admission process for all applicants if the demand for your school and model is high, which again we hope is the case, but the lotteries are the mechanism that we use to work through those. So general admission processes, you heard me say that one of the reasons we like to offer this training in the fall is because it's timely. We know that most of you all have your student application windows open around the first of the year, and they go through February and sometimes March. So again, we're hopeful this information is timely for your purposes. You all are responsible for managing your own application windows and lottery dates. Recently, all of our schools were required to submit lottery enrollment forms, excuse me, as well as policies into Epicenter. Our team is getting close to finalizing our review of those materials so you can begin your recruitment if you haven't already. My team is working to get all of those completed and approved in Epicenter by the 28th of this month. So you should see those perhaps already approved in Epicenter. If you don't yet, or if you go into the system and you see it's been submitted but hasn't been reviewed, just know that we're working on a deadline of about the 28th of this month to get that done so you can move forward in your work. You all develop and release those applications once they're approved. And then moving forward, applications must be open. The application window, excuse me, in Nevada must be open at least 45 days. I've listed that statutory reference for you, but again, you have to meet or exceed that 45-day requirement. Most of our schools go a little bit longer than 45 days, but that is the minimum. Let's talk a little bit about what you do during those 45 days. So if you open, let's say January 1st for your enrollment window and you close March 1st, you clearly cleared that 45-day window. If fewer pupils apply than are available seats, you do not need to run a lottery. So let's say you are a school that has 100 seats available and you have only 90 students that apply to those 100 seats. All of those students on March 2nd may be offered enrollment paperwork to continue to progress through the matriculation process. If you have 100 seats and more pupils apply than there are 100 seats, a lottery will be required, even if it is just for an individual grade level. So you sticking with that 100 seat example, if you've got 100 seats and 150 students apply, you will need to run a lottery for all of those eligible students. And this is critical no matter the order in which those applications are received. So the first student that submits an application on January 1st in a regular traditional lottery system, an enrollment policy would have the same probability of being selected for one of those seats as the last person who submitted their application within that enrollment window. Students and families should be notified shortly after the enrollment window closes or when the lottery is conducted. So again, if a lottery is required, schools should maintain a numbered list of all students, including those on the wait list. And that's really just to keep parents and students informed. It's actually to your benefit to maintain really strong, robust communication throughout this process so that you can keep those families engaged. And if you do have families that are very high on the wait list, maybe number 2 or 3, that strong communication can oftentimes lead to them matriculating to your school if you do have some shuffling around in the spring or summer. And that way they know and can hopefully complete that process should a seat open up. Students and families should be given a reasonable amount of time to accept or decline a seat. There is nothing in statute that requires you to or sets forth a minimum amount of time, but we recommend 5 days, 5 business days, just because we feel like that's reasonable and prevents any barriers of entry and increases access for students and families. If a student declines their seat, the wait list must be utilized in the order determined by the lottery. So let me go back to my 100 seat example. If you have 100 available seats, you've got 150 students, you're essentially going to have a numbered list 1 to 150 after the lottery occurs. Let's say that one of those 100 students that's offered a seat says, actually, I got into charter school B, I'm no longer interested. You will then go to number 101 in your lottery results, or number 1 on your wait list, and they would be the first person, the next student, excuse me, that would be offered admission. If a student submits an application after the window, you may add their name, and you should add their name to the waitlist on a first come, first served basis. So sometimes schools get a little confused about this. So we'll stick with my example one more time. If you've got 150 students applying for 100 seats and your lottery window closes March 1st, and you have a family that comes to you on March the 5th and says, I'm sorry, I missed the deadline. Do you have any seats? Your answer is going to be no, but we will make you number 51 on our wait list. And so that way they know where they're at and you've already conducted your lottery and they're added accordingly. A few reminders. Again, admission criteria cannot include race, gender, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation. So no admission criteria can be based on any of those categories. And as you heard me say earlier, you can also not use prior academic achievement tests or results. You may not leverage any form of interview or require any letter of recommendation, nor can you require any financial incentives or requirements of students and families. You must be a true public school, and you must be open to any and all students that may be interested, so long as they're classified in the appropriate grade level. We also strongly recommend that you engage in a two-part enrollment process. So prior to the lottery, and one of the things that we'll be looking for on your application forms is a very vanilla application form that asks just basic information of students and families. So what is your child's name? What is their date of birth? What is their age, grade, and contact info? That is really all you need and should be asking for as a part of the submission to the lottery. After the lottery, when you've completed and filled those seats, if one is necessary, that is really when you should start asking for more detailed information, such as health information, if the student is on an IEP, if they're classified as an EL learner, emergency contact, etc. It's really, really important that you're asking those questions after the lottery so as to not discriminate and also not create an unintentional barrier for students and families, and really simplify the process for them on the front end. As you heard me say earlier, the SPCSA will review application forms annually. We're in that process right now, and we expect to have that done by the end of the month. We may, in the spring, ask your school for lottery results, as is allowable under Nevada regulation. We are strongly encouraging you make forms available in Spanish when released, but if a family requests a form in perhaps a different language to pursue enrollment at your school, that must be provided upon request. SPCSA staff also again recommends that families after a lottery be afforded at least 5 days before accepting or declining a seat. Again, that's in the spirit of eliminating barriers and giving students and families enough time to make a decision that is best for them. So let's transition a little bit and talk about enrollment preferences. Public charter schools may give the following students enrollment priority. So what this means is these students, if they fall into one or more of these categories, may, what I like to call, jump the line. So if you have an enrollment policy at your school that creates these preferences as allowable under statute, they may essentially move to the front of the line before any lottery is needed. And that would include mainly siblings, children of employee or members of the committee to form or the governing board. At-risk students are the students from overcrowded schools and students from underperforming schools. So let me go back to my example of 100 students. If you have 100 students, 100 seats that are available at your school in the 23-24 school year, and you have 150 students that enter the lottery by the end of your enrollment window, let's say that 10 of those are siblings of students that are already enrolled at your school. Those 10 siblings would essentially jump to the front of the line, meaning that you have 90 seats available for a lottery for the remaining 140 students and families that applied for them. So you're basically taking that group of students, moving into the front of the line, and they would be basically enrolled first, and then the remainder are filled by that lottery. Important note here in italics for you. Number one, if you are using one or more of these priority categories, they should be ranked and adopted by your board in a formal policy. And there's a couple reasons for that. But one is to protect yourselves from potentially sticky situations down the road. If you are a small school and you maybe only have one or two sections of grades, and you have a large number of siblings, or you have quite a large staff, and there are many children of employees applying for a lottery, you may run into a situation where all of those available seats are taken up by these preferences. So you want to be sure that your preferences in your policy are ranked. Maybe it's siblings first, and then you go to children of employees, then you go to children or members of your governing board. We see schools handle that very differently, but your policy should really outline what that hierarchy is, because the last thing you want is for people to not understand what that hierarchy is, and then you're stuck with a situation where you have to explain how you made some of those decisions. We also strongly recommend that you disclose those priority tiers on the application form so as to be transparent with your families and communities about what may be available. Sometimes people don't understand why siblings or children of employees get preference. So it's very easy for you to point to statute and your policy, and we encourage you to do that on the front end so as to avoid those potentially tough to navigate situations after the fact. So let's talk about a weighted lottery. Unlike preferences, where again, you're able to jump the line, weighted lottery provides certain students with a higher chance of being accepted. So it's a little bit different than preferences, although your school may have both preferences and weights. So let me give you a simple example. Certain students receive 2 tickets on this slide instead of one for maybe qualifying for one of those higher weights. So in the example on the left, in a typical lottery, each student receives 1 ticket, whereas in the example on the right, certain qualifying students may receive 2 tickets, and I'm going to talk about the ways that that can happen here in a second. But again, weighted lotteries are a little bit different than preferences, whereas because preferences you are able to jump the line and move to the front. Weighted lottery, everyone goes into the selection process, but some have a higher likelihood or probability of being selected based upon the weight that they may qualify for. So let's talk about the weights and what's allowable here in Nevada. Again, charter schools may, if approved, give additional weight in favor of one of the following subgroups of educationally disadvantaged students. So economically disadvantaged students, we have a number of schools that have approved weighted lotteries that use FRL, or free and reduced price lunch status, as a proxy for this. We also have schools that provide a weight for students that have disabilities. And we also have schools, that provide a weight for students with limited English proficiency or may qualify as English language learners. Those are the 3 most common that we see. I would also say that right now we have schools that add weights anywhere from the range of 2. So two weight for one of those categories that's listed on your screen, all the way up to a couple of schools that actually weight this up to 5. So again, it would be the choice of your team, your board, to figure out what weighted lottery may be best for your community. Most of the time, we see schools implementing a weighted lottery to really close some of those demographic gaps, that we see, or that you all may see in relation to the community schools around you. And so we would encourage you all to think strategically about a weighted lottery if it is the right for you, if it is right for your school and your community specifically, and engage with us about maybe the rationale around that. But again, I wanted to provide you all with not only the regulations citation here, but also the list of what weights could look like. The most common we see are FRL, students with disabilities, or students with limited English proficiency. I would also note that you may adopt a policy that provides for more than one weight. So if you've got students, maybe you want to close a demographic gap between your neighborhood peers and your school for English language learners, you could adopt a weight for English language learners as well as students with disabilities. So that is something that you could certainly consider, and we'd be happy to talk with you more about that as well. 2 requirements of a weighted lottery policy. Number 1, you need to identify the weight to be assigned to each category of students. So in a traditional process, everyone has a weight of 1, but if you add or adopt a weighted lottery policy based on those criteria on the previous slide, those weights could be 2, 3, 4, and sometimes we have schools even at 5 to 1. Based upon what they believe is in the best interest of their school community. Number 2, we need to understand in any adopted policy why you are adjusting those weights. Normally, again, we see this aligned to the vision and mission of the charter school, as well as addressing the specific targets for the percent of students in a category to meet or exceed the local school district or geographic area in which the charter school is located. So if you are seeking to implement a weighted lottery, we're going to talk about some of the mechanics around that more in a second. You would need to present a justification for doing so, as it would need to be approved by both your board as well as the authority board. So again, really quickly, there are differences between preferences and weights, although you could choose to have both a weighted lottery that includes preferences. So preferences are going to provide certain student groups uh, acceptance to your school prior to other groups. Most commonly, these are siblings. And then it can also be, again, children of governing board members or employees. And when you have those preferences, those students move to the front of the line, and then whatever seats are left continue with a traditional lottery process. In the case of weights, all students or qualifying students, excuse me, would receive additional chances in that lottery. And most commonly, this is students that meet one of the criteria. They have to meet one of the criteria on the previous slide. We see this most commonly with English language learners, students with disabilities, and students qualifying for free or reduced price lunch. Those students would receive that additional weight if the appropriate documentation is provided to the school. All of their students would receive the traditional weight of 1. As you can also see, and again, I may sound like a broken record, but I think it's worth reiterating, you can have a lottery policy that has both preferences and weights. So if you've got 100 seats and you've got 10 siblings that qualify, those 90 seats can go to the remaining 140. And of that 140, maybe you have 30 that qualify per your policy for an additional FRL weight of 3.0, they would go into the lottery. And again, their probability is slightly higher of being selected for those remaining 90 seats compared to the other peers in that lottery. Couple of reminders about our oversight and monitoring. So we will always review your application forms, and specifically we're looking for compliance with that 45-day application window in your policy, as well as appropriately approved weighted lotteries and priority enrollment tiers. You heard me say earlier, we plan to complete this review work by the 28th of this month. We will be reaching out with any questions with you directly, and we're going to be reviewing again both the forms and your policy. We may, in the spring, ask for additional information, such as the list of pupils who entered your lottery, a copy of your current wait list, and a copy of your admissions policy, but that usually occurs in the spring. And then one other note here at the bottom, we did provide enrollment cap reminders for this current school year already. If you need that resent, please let us know. You should also expect that your enrollment cap reminders for the 23-24 school year to go out probably after the first of the year. So we always aim to get that to you prior to entering lottery occurring, so that way you're fully aware of how many available seats you might have and can plan accordingly. So you want to change your lottery policy. This may constitute an amendment of the charter application, but we like to make it fairly straightforward. So number one, schools seeking to change enrollment preferences do not need full SPCSA authority approval unless the addition is through an articulation agreement. I do want to note one change from the deck you got yesterday via email from Danny. If you are seeking to change enrollment preferences, we do not bring that to our full authority board, but we do have that signed off by our executive director. So in the case that you are looking to adjust those preferences, maybe add preferences to your previous policy, that's fine. Does not likely need to be in front of our full board, but we will want to review that as a staff and sign off prior to implementation. Articulation agreements allow preferential enrollment between two separate charter schools. So most frequently we see that when we've got a school that maybe ends maybe an 8th grade, and there's a nearby separate charter school that has a high school program. An articulation agreement can provide preference under Nevada statute for those 8th graders to matriculate to that high school relatively easy, or at least with a possible preference should they provide that documentation. If you are going to pursue an articulation agreement, please talk to us, as that does require approval not only by the local board, your board, excuse me, but also by the full authority board. And as a reminder, anytime you're changing your lottery preferences, that always requires approval of your governing board. Schools seeking to change to a weighted lottery do need to submit a formal amendment for the SPCSA approval. To determine what may be required of your school, I would ask that you reach out to Danny, who's going to speak here momentarily to our amendment processes and timeline. Once that is submitted, the authority will consider approval at an upcoming meeting. And again, just like preference changes, if you are seeking to adopt a weighted lottery policy, that first must be approved by your board. And in the case of weights, that would also go to the full authority board. So please work with Danny on submitting an amendment so we can get that timing right for you. So Danny, can I turn it over to you to talk briefly about the amendments?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. We created a short form for lottery changes, enrollment changes that do require an amendment. Within that, there's about 6 questions that you would need to answer along with the policy change that you're going to be contemplating. I recommend you to reach out directly to me. I can send that form to you. Part of that form includes an executive summary of the proposed changes, an explanation of any planned marketing or outreach to the school proposes to implement upon a change to the enrollment policy, a copy of a proposed articulation agreement. Now, that wasn't contemplated as part of the lottery, but we have had schools who are changing their enrollment policies by entering into articulation agreements with maybe another charter school or some other entity that allows for priority enrollment based upon that articulation agreement. If your school and another school do propose on entering into some sort of agreement with one another like that, both schools do need to submit a board-approved amendment, which both are then reviewed by the authority, and we provide a recommendation to our board. We also do request a draft of the proposed lottery policy that includes the changes that are contemplated, whether the changing of weights or in the case of an articulation agreement showing the priority list being updated to show what order that is in. One thing to note that we really want to be clear on, if your school is contemplating an enrollment lottery change, whether to add weights, we recommend any sort of change be made well in advance of your application window opening. That allows for you the time to notify families of students of the changes, and so that everyone is aware of this prior to the window opening. So if any change that would need to be completed maybe for this year, right? If you're going to be enrolling in the spring, really take a look at the calendar. Our next board meeting is December 18th. So we're getting pretty close, or I'm sorry, December 16th. My apologies. So it would be really tight at this time. So if you are contemplating changes to the enrollment by adding weights or anything like that, if you're unable to finalize an application, get it approved by your board, submit it to us, and then we agendize it. If you're unable to do that this year, you may want to consider enacting that change for next year, so that families of students have plenty of time to understand that the changes that the school is contemplating. So to reiterate, basically, if you're interested in making any of these changes, please reach out to me. We have a short form. It's not the full amendment form, so we've tried to make this process as painless and smooth as possible for schools. So please feel free to reach out directly and be happy to discuss more further details with specific requests as they do come up.
Great. Thank you, Danny. So this concludes our presentation. Danny, I'll ask that you go ahead and stop the recording. I do not believe we've had any